The engagement ring on Celeste's hand glittered in the late afternoon sun. A flawless 5-carat diamond, a symbol of everything his family wanted: alliance, power, tradition, everything except love. Damian Cole walked beside his fiancée, nodding along as she chatted about wedding venues, the guest list, and a wedding he didn't want at all. His cold gray eyes swept unconsciously over the crowded Central Park. Children playing, families gathered close, couples strolling hand in hand, the ordinary lives of ordinary people, the kind of life a mafia boss like him had never truly tasted. And then he saw her. Time stopped. His heart pounded so violently he was sure Celeste could hear it. It was Freya Bennett, the woman who had haunted his dreams for 4 years. Her dark brown hair was tied back in a careless hurry, her skin paler than he remembered. An old T-shirt from a food truck clinging to a frame that looked thinner than before. But it was still her, still the woman he had once cherished, touching her with trembling hands in the quietest hours of the night. But it wasn't Freya who made his world tilt off its axis. It was the stroller built for 3. 3 children about 3 years old with their mother's brown hair and the unmistakable sharp lines of the Cole bloodline. The little girl lifted her face to watch a bird perched on a branch, and Damian's breath caught in his throat. Gray eyes, cold, keen, exactly like the eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. It was his own gaze staring back at him. Freya's eyes found him across the distance. Those green eyes widened, and her face drained of color as if she'd just seen a ghost from the past. In the space of a single heartbeat, they stood there looking at each other. Through 4 years of silence and pain, through cruel lies and lonely nights, she seized the stroller handle and ran. Damian stood frozen in the middle of Central Park, watching her thin figure disappear behind the trees. Beside him, Celeste was still saying something about wedding flowers and invitations, but he couldn't hear a thing. In his head, there was only one thought, ringing like a bell. 3 children, his eyes. 4 years ago, his children. She had been pregnant with his children, and he, the man who held an entire underworld empire in his hands, hadn't even known they existed. Where would Damian and Freya's story go from here? Could he make up for 4 years of absence? Stay with us until the end of the story. If your heart is beating faster, hit like to support the channel. Share this with a friend who loves emotional stories. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next stories. Damian couldn't remember what he'd said to Celeste to escape that date. Maybe it was an emergency meeting, maybe a business issue that needed handling. He didn't care. The only thing he cared about was the image of 3 children with cold gray eyes burning hot in his mind. 20 minutes after Freya disappeared, Damian was sitting in a black Bentley with his phone pressed to his ear. Ryder Mercer, his right hand for 8 years, the only man he trusted absolutely, picked up after the first ring. "Find everything on Freya Bennett," Damian said, his voice cold as steel, yet something trembling underneath. Her current address, her job, her financial situation, everything. And Ryder, she has 3 children. I need to know everything about them. The brief silence on the other end made it clear even Ryder was caught off guard. But a man didn't become the right hand of a mafia boss by asking questions. "I'll have the information within 2 hours, boss." Those 2 hours were the longest 2 hours of Damian's life. He sat in his private office, a glass of whiskey in his hand that didn't drop by a single sip, his eyes fixed on the wall as if he could stare straight through it and see Freya and the children. When the phone buzzed, he answered before it could ring a second time. Ryder's voice was low and steady, but there was something in it that made Damian tighten his grip on the phone. Freya Bennett, 27 years old, owns a small food truck called Bennett's Kitchen in Brooklyn, currently living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the mid-city area with 3 children. Their names are Bella, Theo, and Ollie Bennett. 3 years and 2 months old. There's no father's name on any birth certificate. Damian closed his eyes. 3 years and 2 months. The timeline fit perfectly. Freya had been pregnant when he'd forced her away with the cruelest words of his life. "What about her financial situation?" he asked, even though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Ryder hesitated for a second. "Not good, boss. She's 4 months behind on rent. The food truck needs major repairs, but there's no money. And there's something else." His voice dropped. "There's a file from Child Protective Services. Someone reported the children's living conditions. A social worker will come to inspect tomorrow." Rage flared in Damian's chest like a burning fire. His 3 children, his blood, were living in poverty. The woman he loved was fighting day by day to raise them. And he, the man who could buy this entire city outright, hadn't even known they existed. "The food truck address," Damian said, his voice an order that couldn't be argued with. "Brooklyn, the corner of Atlantic and Court. She usually closes at 9 in the evening." Damian looked at his watch. 7:30. He had enough time. "Get the car ready," he said, and hung up. 4 years ago, he'd let Freya go to protect her. 4 years ago, he'd believed it was the only way to keep her safe. But now, staring at the ruthless facts in front of him, Damian realized a bitter truth. He hadn't protected her. He'd only shoved her into a different hell, alone with 3 children in her belly. And tonight, he would fix everything, whether Freya wanted him to or not. The food truck, Bennett's Kitchen, sat on the corner of a quiet street, yellow light spilling from a small window like a lonely lighthouse in the Brooklyn night. Damian parked a short distance away, sitting still in the darkness, watching Freya move inside. She was cleaning up, her back to the service window, stopping now and then to rub her lower back as if her body was too worn out after a long day. He stepped out of the car when the clock struck 9:15. Every step on the sidewalk felt heavy, not from fear, because Damian Cole didn't know what fear was, but because he didn't know where to begin. 4 years of silence couldn't be erased with a single apology. Freya was scrubbing the cooking surface when his voice sounded behind her. "We need to talk." She froze. The spatula in her hand fell to the floor with a sharp clatter in the quiet space. Slowly, she turned, and Damian saw the change etched into her face. 4 years had carved worry lines around her eyes, hollowed lines along her cheekbones, but her green eyes were still as sharp as ever, and now they were burning with anger. "No, we don't," she said, her voice ice cold, though Damian could hear the tremor underneath. "You made yourself very clear 4 years ago. I've got nothing to say to you." "Freya, please." "It's Miss Bennett to you," she cut in, turning her back and scrubbing with more force than necessary. "And if you came here to buy food, we're closed." Damian stepped closer, close enough to smell frying oil and the sweat of hard work mixed with that familiar vanilla scent he'd never been able to forget. "I saw them today in the park. 3 children." Freya's shoulders tightened. She stopped scrubbing, but she didn't turn around. "My children," Damian said, each word dragged up from deep in his chest. "They're mine, aren't they?" The silence stretched until it was hard to breathe. Then Freya spun around, her green eyes now shining with tears, but her voice still hard as steel. "My children. They're my children. You don't have the right to call them yours." "Freya, who do you think you are?" She stepped forward, a finger stabbing straight into his chest. And Damian realized she was shaking with rage, with pain, with 4 years of restraint, finally exploding. "You think you can show up after 4 years and claim them as your children? Where were you when I was vomiting every morning from morning sickness and still had to go to work? Where were you when I gave birth to 3 children alone in a public hospital without insurance, with no one holding my hand? Where were you, Damian?" Each question landed like a knife straight through him. Damian wanted to answer, to explain, but the storm of Freya's emotions gave him no chance. 4 years, she shouted, tears spilling down her cheeks now, and she didn't even bother to wipe them away. 4 years of staying up all night with 3 newborns crying at the same time. 4 years of working 16 hours a day just to afford formula. 4 years of having to choose between paying the electric bill or buying medicine when Ollie had a fever. 4 years of Theo asking me, "Mom, why don't I have a dad like my friends?" And I didn't know how to answer. Her voice caught, but she swallowed it down and went on, each word like fire. "And you know what the worst part is? I found out I was pregnant exactly 1 week after you looked me in the eye and told me I was nothing. 1 week after you called me a regrettable distraction and a mistake you regretted. I was carrying 3 of your children inside me, and you had just crushed me into pieces." Damian felt as if someone had ripped all the air out of his lungs. The image of Freya alone, pregnant, believing he hated her, that he was disgusted by her, tore him apart in a way no enemy ever had. "If I'd known," he began, his voice rough. "What would you have done?" Freya cut in, letting out a bitter laugh. "Marry me, bring me home to meet your noble Mafia family, introduce me as the orphan girl who used to wait tables that you happened to sleep with?" She shook her head. "We both know that would have never happened." Silence dropped between them like a heavy curtain. Damian looked at the woman in front of him, the woman who had carried it all alone while he lived in silk and comfort, and he hated himself more than he ever had. "You're right," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. 4 years ago, I was a coward. I chose the easy thing instead of fighting for you, and you paid the price for my cowardice." He stopped, swallowing hard. "But I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I came because the social worker's coming to inspect tomorrow, and I can't stand here and watch my children get taken away." Freya's face went pale. "You know about that?" "I know everything. The rent debt, the truck needing repairs, the CPS file." Damian held her gaze. "Let me help. Not for you, if you don't want it, but for them. For the children I've never even held." Freya stared at him for a long time, and in those green eyes Damian saw the war inside her. Pride against reality, hatred against the fear of losing her children. Finally she spoke, her voice exhausted down to the bone. "I need to think." It wasn't a refusal, and for Damian, that was enough. At least for now. Freya had turned her back to leave when Damian's voice came raw and hoarse with pain. "There were threats against you." She stopped, but she didn't turn around. 4 years ago, my family's enemies discovered you. They knew how much you mattered to me." Damian drew a deep breath, and when he continued, his voice sounded like it was being strangled in his throat. "They sent me photographs, photos of you going to work, you coming home, you sleeping through the window of your apartment. Along with them was a message. If you want her kept intact, make sure she's no longer important." Freya turned slowly, her face bone white under the yellow light of the food truck. "What did you say?" "I had to make them believe you meant nothing to me." Damian stepped closer, and in those cold gray eyes Freya saw for the first time something she'd never seen before. Pure pain, unmasked. "The only way to protect you was to push you away as far as possible, as fast as possible. And to do that, I had to say the words I knew would make you never come back." The silence between them was heavy enough to steal the air from the space. Freya stood there, lips parted, trying to process what she'd just heard. For 4 years, she'd lived believing she was nothing more than a rich man's amusement. For 4 years, she told herself she was foolish to love a man like Damian Cole. And now he was telling her that every cruel word, every icy act had been a performance. "So you decided to play God with my life?" Her voice trembled. But she still tried to hold on to hardness. "You thought you were protecting me by crushing my heart." "I thought it was the only way to keep you alive," Damian answered, his voice reduced to a whisper. "I'd rather you hate me and live than love me and die." Freya laughed, but it was the bitterest sound Damian had ever heard. "Do you know what happened 1 week after you protected me?" she asked, tears sliding down her cheeks. I sat in the bathroom of the cheap apartment I just rented with my last savings, holding a pregnancy test with 2 red lines. 2 lines, Damian. And 1 week before that, you looked me in the eye and told me I was a mistake. Each word hit Damian's chest like a hammer. He'd known she was pregnant when he saw her again. He'd counted the timeline himself, but hearing her say it, describing the moment she realized she was carrying his children while she was still bleeding from the things he'd said, destroyed him in a way he hadn't expected. I thought about not keeping them, Freya went on. Her voice as if she were talking about someone else, far away and hollow. I was 23, no family, no money, no one beside me, and the man I loved had just told me I was trash. I stood outside the clinic for a full hour. She paused, drawing a shaky breath. But then I thought, these are my children. Even if their father hates me, they still deserve to live. They still deserve to be loved. Damian felt his knees wanting to give way. The image of Freya standing alone outside that clinic, 23 years old, pregnant with 3 children, believing their father was disgusted by her, would haunt him until the day he died. "You gave birth to them alone?" he asked, his voice caught and thick. "Triplets, Bella, Theo, and Ollie. An emergency C-section, 12 hours in recovery," Freya said, her tone flat like she was reading a grocery list. Lena, my friend, was the only one there. She had to take 2 weeks off work to look after me because I couldn't even get up on my own. Ollie was underweight. Had to stay in an incubator another month. The hospital bill was almost $60,000. I'm still paying it off now. "Why didn't you come looking for me?" Damian asked, though he knew the question was meaningless. Freya looked at him as if he'd said the most ridiculous thing in the world. "Looking for you. You told me I was an embarrassing distraction, a stain you wanted erased. You think I was going to crawl to your door and beg you to claim the children?" She shook her head bitterly. "I might be poor, Damian, but I still had my dignity, the only thing I had left after you took everything." Damian closed his eyes, and when he opened them, there was a kind of resolve in that gray gaze Freya had never seen. "I can't change the past. I can't take back the 4 years we lost, but I can change the future." He looked straight into her eyes. "Let me help, Freya, not because of guilt, because they're my children, and you're the only woman I've ever loved." Freya stood there staring at him, her green eyes full of suspicion and exhaustion. She'd heard too many promises in her life to believe them easily, from foster families who promised they'd love her, then sent her back to the home when they had children of their own, from bosses who promised a raise, then fired her when business slowed, and from the very man standing in front of her, the man who once promised he'd be there, then shattered her with the cruelest words he could find. "How do you want to help?" she asked, her voice still guarded. Damian didn't hesitate. "Pay off the rent debt, fix the food truck, and most importantly, deal with the social worker tomorrow." He paused for a beat. "I have a guest house in the Hamptons separate from the main house. You and the kids can move there. There are enough rooms for all 4 of you. Security 24 hours a day and you'll have privacy." Freya gave a sharp, mocking laugh. "Move into your house? Are you out of your mind?" "I'm completely clear-headed," Damian said, his voice steady, not wavering. "This is the best way to show Child Protective Services that the children have a stable living environment, a proper home, safe with both father and mother. They won't have any reason to take them." "Both father and mother," Freya repeated, bitterness layered into every word. "You haven't even met them. You don't know Bella's afraid of the dark. You don't know Theo's allergic to peanuts. You don't know Ollie will scream if anyone changes where his toys are. You don't know anything about the children you're demanding to call yours." "Then give me the chance to know," Damian said, stepping closer, his voice dropping into something close to pleading, something this Mafia boss had never offered anyone. "I know I don't deserve it. I know you've got every reason to throw me out and never look at me again, but this isn't about me or you anymore, Freya. It's about Bella, Theo, and Ollie. They deserve to be safe. They deserve not to worry about being separated from their mother." Freya turned away, biting her lip until she tasted blood. She hated that he was right. She hated that no matter how badly she wanted to refuse, her pride couldn't carry her through this. The miserable apartment, the debt piling up, the broken truck, and now CPS. One more small mistake, and she could lose the children forever. She thought of Ollie with those wide eyes that always needed stability. She thought of Theo, always trying to be strong, though he was only 3. She thought of Bella, who kept asking why their home didn't have a dad like Lily's. Freya turned back, her voice hard. "If I agree, there are conditions." Damian nodded immediately. "Anything. This is temporary. Only until I'm stable again." She lifted one finger. "You don't get to give orders or control my life." A second finger. She lifted a third finger, her gaze trembling with intensity. And most important, never. Never make those children love you and then disappear. Her voice shook. "I can survive being hurt again, but if you hurt them, if you make them believe in you and then leave like you left me, I swear I won't forgive you in this life or the next." Damian looked at her, and in those cold gray eyes Freya saw something she hadn't seen 4 years ago. Sincerity, determination, and a deep pain he wasn't trying to hide anymore. "I promise," he said, each word like an oath. "No matter how long it takes, no matter what I have to do, I'll never leave them or you." Freya didn't say anything. She didn't believe the promise. Not yet, but she would give him the chance to prove it. Not for him, but for the 3 children sleeping at home, children who deserved a safe roof, even if it was only temporary. "My car's over there," she said at last, her voice tired. "I need to get home. The babysitter charges extra after 9. The next morning came faster than Freya wanted. She barely slept, tossing all night, thinking about seeing Damian and what would happen today. When the doorbell rang at 9 in the morning, she knew the decisive moment had arrived. Claudia Monroe stood in the hallway in a serious gray suit, a thick file folder in her hand. But she wasn't alone. Beside her stood Mr. Morales, the landlord, a stack of papers in his hand, and a face hard with no compassion at all. "Miss Bennett," Claudia began, her voice professional but firm. "I'm here to conduct the scheduled inspection, and it appears Mr. Morales has a few matters to address first." The landlord didn't wait to be invited. He stepped straight into the doorway. 4 months, Miss Bennett. 4 months without rent. I've given you enough time." He shook the paper in his hand. "This is an eviction notice. You've got 7 days to move out." Freya felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. She stood in the doorway, one arm holding Ollie, who was crying from being woken up, while Bella and Theo clung to her legs, sensing the tension even if they didn't understand what it meant. "Please give me more time," Freya begged, her voice catching. "I'll have the money. I'm trying." "You've been saying that for 3 months. Morales cut her off without mercy. "I've got a new tenant ready to pay double." 7 days, Miss Bennett. No negotiation." Claudia Monroe watched with sharp eyes, her handwriting continuous in her notebook. "Miss Bennett, I understand you're struggling, but the children need a stable environment, a fixed and safe home. If you can't ensure that, I'll be forced to intervene for their benefit." "No!" Freya almost shouted, clutching Ollie tighter. "You can't take my children. I'll find a way. I always find a way." Right then, a low voice sounded from the far end of the hallway. "Is there a problem here?" Everyone turned. Damian Cole walked toward them with the bearing of a man used to the world moving aside for him. A perfect black suit, cold gray eyes sweeping the scene, and when his gaze landed on the tears on Freya's cheeks, his jaw tightened hard enough to crush stone. Claudia Monroe straightened, instinct telling her this man wasn't ordinary. "Who are you? What connection do you have to this family?" Damian stepped to Freya's side, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. "I'm Damian Cole," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the cramped hallway. "The father of these children." Freya nearly dropped Ollie from shock. She turned to Damian, unable to believe he'd just claimed them in front of strangers. Damian answered with a slight nod, his eyes telling her to trust him. The father? Claudia raised an eyebrow. My file shows no father listed on any of the children's birth certificates. A mistake I'm correcting, Damian replied, his voice unshaken. I didn't know my children existed until recently. Now that I do, I intend to be fully involved in their lives. Mister. Morales cleared his throat, clearly unimpressed. Wonderful. A touching reunion. That doesn't change the fact Miss Bennett owes me nearly $8,000 in rent. Pay up or move out. Damian took out his phone, calm as if he were ordering morning coffee. Ryder, transfer $30,000 to Mr. Morales' account, right now. He looked at the landlord. Account number. Morales' mouth fell open. What? Your account number? Damian repeated, patient like he was speaking to a slow child. $30,000 will cover the old debt and serve as a convenience fee for your immediate silence and cooperation with the social services. I assume that settles the eviction issue and any negative reports you've made. 5 minutes later, Morales' phone buzzed with a transfer notification. He stared at the screen, then at Damian, then back at the screen, his expression shifting from disbelief to fear as he realized what kind of man he was standing in front of. Yes, of course. No problem at all. Miss Bennett can stay as long as she wants. He shoved the eviction notice into his pocket and disappeared as quickly as he'd arrived. Claudia Monroe remained, watching everything with an assessing gaze. Mr. Cole, it's good that you have financial means, but I still need to evaluate the children's living environment, and your sudden appearance raises several questions about long-term stability. Miss Bennett and the children will be moving to my home today, Damian said. I have a separate house in the Hamptons, fully equipped and secure. You can come inspect at any time. I'll need documentation of financial capability and a care plan within 48 hours, Claudia said with a nod, her face softening slightly. But I'll acknowledge this is a positive development. When Claudia left, Freya stood in the hallway, still holding Ollie, feeling as if she'd survived a storm. She turned to say something to Damian, but a tiny voice at her feet cut through. Are you Daddy? Bella stood there, big round gray eyes lifted to Damian with the pure curiosity of a 3-year-old. She'd heard her mother talk about a father, had asked why he wasn't here, had dreamed of the day he would appear, and now a tall man with eyes just like hers was standing in their hallway. Damian slowly sank to his knees, the fabric of a suit worth thousands pressing into a dirty wooden floor without hesitation. Yes, Princess, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Daddy's here. Bella tilted her head, studying his face with the comical seriousness of little children. Then she beamed, bright as the sun, and held out her small arms. Pick Bella up, Daddy. One word, Daddy, from the lips of the daughter he'd never held. Damian felt something shatter inside his chest. The walls he'd built for 36 years collapsing completely under a 3-year-old girl with eyes like his in a way that hurt. He lifted Bella, and when her little arms wrapped around his neck, when the faint scent of baby soap and gummy candy filled his nose, Damian Cole, a Mafia boss who didn't know fear, had to bite his lip hard for the first time in his life so he wouldn't cry in front of anyone. The guest house in the Hamptons was larger than every apartment Freya had ever lived in combined. She stood at the doorway, 3 children clinging to her hands, and tried not to let her jaw fall open as she looked around. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the deep blue Atlantic, an open kitchen with a marble island and gleaming appliances she'd only ever seen in magazines. An oak staircase led to the second floor where there were 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Everything was clean, modern, and so expensive. Freya felt afraid to touch anything. Behind her, Ryder Mercer set down 3 suitcases and 2 black trash bags filled with the children's toys. That was everything they owned. 3 worn suitcases, 2 trash bags, and clothes bought from secondhand stores. Her entire life and the lives of her 3 children reduced to a small corner of this vast living room. The contrast tightened Freya's throat. She'd worked 16 hours a day for 3 years and still couldn't get ahead of her debts. Damian needed only one phone call to move $100,000 as if it were pocket change. Their worlds were so different she found herself wondering how, 4 years ago, they'd ever believed they could belong together. "Mom, look!" Bella ran to the window, eyes wide at the ocean stretching endlessly. So much water, more than Mrs. Johnson's bathtub. Mrs. Johnson was the babysitter Freya hired for the cheapest rate she could find. An older woman with a small apartment and a bathtub that rusted. That was the only measure of largeness Bella had ever known. Theo stood beside his mother, gray eyes alert as he watched the unfamiliar space. He was 3, but older than his years, always the protector of his mother and siblings, since he'd been old enough to understand their home didn't have a father. "How long are we staying here, Mom?" he asked, his voice small but serious. "Just for a while, sweetheart," Freya said, bending to smooth her son's hair, "until Mom can get things sorted." Ollie said nothing. He'd found a corner and was busy lining up his toy cars in a perfectly straight row, a familiar ritual that helped him feel safe in a new place. Freya watched her youngest with worry. Ollie hated change. He needed routine, stability, everything in the right place. And she'd pulled him out of a miserable but familiar apartment and brought him somewhere completely unknown. Damian appeared in the doorway, still in the suit from the morning, but his jacket was off and his shirt sleeves rolled up. "The main bedroom connects to 2 smaller rooms through a shared door. You can keep it open so you'll hear them at night," he said, gentle as if he was afraid of startling her. "The refrigerator's stocked. Ryder made sure there's fresh milk and cereal I guess the kids would like. If you need anything else—" "Damian." Freya cut in, exhausted. "I need to talk to you alone." He nodded and signaled for Ryder to take the children outside to see the pool. When they were finally alone, Freya turned to face him, green eyes guarded. "Bella called you Daddy," she said, not accusing, only stating what was true. "She's waited for a father for 3 years, and now she thinks she's found one. Theo's trying to figure out whether you're someone he can trust. And Ollie—" She glanced toward the window where her youngest was carefully arranging toys under Ryder's watch. "Ollie's trying to adapt to a completely new place, and that's the hardest thing for him." "I understand," Damian said. "No, you don't." Freya stepped closer, her voice lower now, but every word heavy as stone. "They're starting to get used to you, starting to believe in you, and that terrifies me more than anything in my life." She drew a shaky breath. "I survived when you left me 4 years ago. It was painful, brutal, but I survived. But if you do that to them, if you make them love you, trust you, need you, and then one day you decide to return to your powerful Mafia life and disappear." Her voice broke. "They'll never recover, and neither will I." Damian stood there looking at the woman in front of him, all hurt and strength tangled together. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice an oath. "Not this time." Freya didn't answer. She only looked at him with the eyes of someone who'd learned not to believe promises. Then she turned away and walked toward the stairs to unpack the children's things, leaving Damian alone in the lavish living room with 3 battered suitcases and the weight of trust he had to rebuild from the beginning. The first week in the Hamptons was a string of chaos and outright disaster for Damian Cole. The man who once ran an entire underworld empire with an iron fist now stood helpless in front of 3 3-year-olds in a kitchen. The first breakfast he tried to make with his own hands ended with pancakes burned as black as coal, smoke filling the kitchen, and the fire alarm shrieking through the house. Bella ran in circles screaming because she thought the place was truly on fire. Theo planted himself in front of his mother in a protective stance, even though he only came up to Freya's knees, and Ollie sat down flat on the floor, hands clamped over his ears, sobbing because the noise shattered the quiet he needed. Freya took 20 minutes to calm Ollie while Damian stood in the wreckage of what was supposed to be breakfast, wearing the face of a man who had just lost his first battle in his life. "I've killed people," he whispered to himself, staring at the charred piece of pancake in his hand, and I can't even make breakfast for my kids. But Damian Cole wasn't the kind of man who quit. The next day, he got up at 5, watched cooking tutorials for children on his phone, and tried again. This time the pancakes only burned on one side. On the third day, they were a little raw in the middle. By the 5th day, when Bella took her first bite and squealed, "So good, Daddy," Damian felt like he'd conquered the whole world. He learned to cut sandwiches into star shapes because Bella wouldn't eat them if they were square. He learned to warm milk to exactly 37 degrees because Theo would frown if it was too hot or too cold. He learned to place Ollie's plate in the exact right corner of the table. The plate had to be blue, the spoon had to go on the left, and absolutely nothing on the plate could touch anything else. It was those small details about Ollie that made Damian start paying closer attention. The boy didn't respond when someone called his name, but he would turn instantly if he heard a toy car rolling on the floor. He didn't like being hugged, but he would sit close to Damian for hours if Damian let him play alone in silence. He could count to 100 in 3 languages, but he couldn't answer a simple question like, "Are you hungry?" One night, after the children had fallen asleep, Damian asked Freya about what he'd noticed. "Ollie has developmental issues," Freya said, her voice gentle but edged with a guardedness, as if she was bracing for him to react badly. "High-functioning autism. He's smarter than most kids his age in some areas, but social communication and sensory processing are major problems. He needs routine. He needs everything to be predictable. Any change can make him collapse." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Freya looked at him, unblinking green eyes steady. "Because I was waiting to see how you'd react when you figured it out yourself. A lot of people run when they learn their child isn't normal." She made quotation marks in the air, bitter. "I wanted to know what kind you were." Damian was silent for a long time. Then he said, his voice low and certain, "Ollie is my son. There's nothing about him that's not normal. He just sees the world in a different way. And if I need to learn to see the world the way he does to understand my child, I'll learn." From that night on, Damian began studying autism with the same seriousness he'd once used to study business rivals. He read books, watched expert videos, even reached out to top pediatric specialists to understand his son better. He learned to warn Ollie before any change. He learned to read the tiny signals that meant the boy was getting overloaded. He learned to sit in silence beside his son without needing words, letting presence be enough. In the evenings, Damian read stories to all 3 children. Bella loved princesses and castles. Theo loved superheroes. Ollie loved books about cars and numbers. Damian read them all, changed his voice for each character, and discovered he truly liked this. He liked the feeling of 3 small bodies curled into him. He liked the scent of baby shampoo and strawberry toothpaste. He liked Bella's giggles. Theo's, "And then what, Daddy?" And the way Ollie silently turned each page with absolute focus. He also discovered they already knew some Italian, the language his grandfather had taught him before the Cole family became too busy building a criminal empire. "Buongiorno," he said one morning, testing them. And Bella answered, "Buongiorno, Daddy," with a familiarity that made his heart swell. Realizing Freya had kept his culture alive in them, Ollie responded to the familiar Italian lullabies Freya had whispered to them since birth. A small miracle that left Damian both astonished and deeply moved by Freya's hidden devotion. Freya watched all of it from a distance, with eyes Damian couldn't read. She no longer protested when he spent time with the children, no longer stood guard as if afraid he would hurt them. But she still didn't fully trust him, still wouldn't let herself soften. The wall around her remained tall and solid, built from 4 years of suffering and broken promises. And yet every night when Damian kissed each child's forehead and whispered, "Daddy loves you," Freya stood outside the bedroom door listening, and another brick in that wall fell away. She just didn't know whether to fear it or hope for it. 2 weeks passed, and Damian began to realize that each of his children was a separate world, one that had to be discovered in a different way. Bella was sunshine. She was a storm. She was laughter that never stopped. She could talk from morning to night without ever getting tired. About a butterfly she saw outside the window, about how her doll needed a new dress, about why clouds were white, about anything that drifted through that busy little mind. Damian, a man shaped by silence and calculation, felt dizzy at first under the endless waterfall of his daughter's words. But then he learned to listen, truly listen. And he realized that beneath those seemingly pointless stories was Bella's way of connecting to the world, her way of processing everything around her through speech. "Daddy, do you know why Bella likes purple?" she asked one afternoon while sitting in his lap watching cartoons. Damian shook his head, and Bella explained that purple was a mix of red, strong like Daddy, and blue, gentle like Mommy. So it was the color of family. Damian had to turn his face away so his daughter wouldn't see his eyes sting. Theo was completely different. He was quiet, watchful, and carried a responsibility no 3-year-old should ever have to carry. From the moment he was old enough to understand that his mother had to struggle alone. Theo had taken on the role of the man of the house. He always stood between his mother and anyone he saw as a threat, even Damian in the early days. Damian remembered the way Theo had looked at him with weary gray eyes, evaluating as if weighing whether Damian deserved a place in their life. "You don't need to stare at Daddy like that," Damian said one night when he caught Theo standing outside his mother's bedroom door like a guard. "Daddy's never going to hurt your mom." Theo stayed silent for a long time, then answered in a seriousness that hurt. "Mom cried a lot before when she thought I was asleep. I heard." Damian knelt down to his son's level, his chest squeezing tight. "I know, and I'm sorry for that. I'll spend my whole life making it up to her so she never has to cry alone again." Theo studied his face for a long time, then finally nodded once, as if delivering a verdict. "Okay, but I'm going to watch." But Ollie was the one who surprised Damian most. The boy interacted little, rarely looked anyone in the eye, and could sit for hours alone with toy cars without needing anyone. The experts said autistic children had trouble bonding with others, that Damian shouldn't expect too much. But they were wrong. Because even though Ollie didn't hug, didn't kiss, didn't say, "I love you, Daddy," the way Bella did, he showed affection in his own language. He began moving closer to Damian day by day. If Damian sat on the sofa, Ollie would sit beside him, not touching, but close enough that their shoulders were only a few centimeters apart. If Damian stood in the kitchen, Ollie would play with cars in the nearest corner of the kitchen. If Damian read a book, Ollie would bring his own book and read alongside him. Freya was the first to notice it. "Do you know what that means?" she asked one night as they stood watching the children sleep. Ollie curled up in his blanket right where Damian had just been sitting to read stories. "Ollie never does that with anyone. Not Lena, not babysitters, not anyone, only me." Her voice tightened. "And now you." Damian looked at his youngest son with wet eyes. The boy didn't say he loved his father, but every time he sat a little closer, every time he chose the nearest spot, Ollie was saying it his own way. And for Damian, it was more precious than any words. 3 children, 3 different ways of loving. And Damian Cole, a Mafia boss who once believed he didn't have a heart, now realized his heart had been split into 3 parts and handed over completely to these small lives. That night, after the children were fast asleep, Freya found Damian standing alone on the balcony, looking out at the ocean. The full moon laid a sheet of silver over the dark water, and the sea wind carried a familiar salt that she'd started to love after 2 weeks living here. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the broad line of his back, the way he leaned on the railing with a thoughtfulness rarely seen in a powerful Mafia boss. Then she stepped outside and stood beside him, still keeping a safe distance. "You used to stand like this back then," she said, her voice as light as the night wind, looking out the penthouse window and thinking. "I always wondered what you were thinking." Damian turned to her, gray eyes softening under the moonlight. "I was thinking about you, about how to keep you close without pulling you into my world full of darkness." He paused. "Then I failed at both." They stood in silence for a long time, with only the distant waves and the wind whispering through the trees. Freya didn't know what made her speak. Maybe 2 weeks of watching him patiently learn how to be a father. Maybe the way Ollie sat close to him like he'd found a safe harbor. Or maybe she was simply too tired of holding up her defenses for 4 years. "I taught them Italian," she said suddenly, and she felt Damian stiffen beside her. "Since they learned to talk every night before bed, I taught them a few new words." "Why?" His voice went rough. Freya stared out at the sea, afraid to look at him because she didn't want him to see what she was trying to hide. "Because I wanted them to know a part of their father. Even when their father wasn't here, even when I thought their father hated me, I still wanted them to have something from you." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't give them your presence, but I could give them your language, your history, one small piece, so they'd know where they came from." Damian turned fully toward her, and Freya saw his eyes shining under the moon. "You hate me," he said, voice catching, "but you still kept me alive in their lives." "I never hated you." Freya finally looked at him. "I tried. Believe me, I tried so hard. It would have been easier if I hated you. Easier to wake up every day and not see your eyes in Bella's eyes, not hear your voice in the way Theo speaks, not see your stubbornness in the way Ollie refuses to change." She took a shaky breath. "But I can't hate you because hating you would mean hating a part of them." "Freya." Damian stepped closer, and this time she didn't step back. "I'm not ready to forgive," she said, lifting a hand to stop him. 4 years can't be erased in 2 weeks, no matter how perfect your pancakes get." A small smile flickered over her mouth, the first smile she'd given him since the day they met again. "But I'm trying, watching you with them. The way you're patient with Ollie, the way you listen to every word Bella says, the way you let Theo trust you in his own way." She paused, her voice softening. "You're different now. Or maybe you were always this man and I just never got to see it." "I've got something to fight for now," Damian said, his eyes never leaving hers. 4 years ago, I was a coward because I didn't know what I was fighting for. Now I do. You, them, this family." Freya didn't speak, but as they stood there in silence, she let her shoulder brush lightly against his. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning. The peaceful morning was shattered by the roar of a sports car engine outside the gate. Damian was in the kitchen making breakfast for the children when Ryder called to report an uninvited guest. Before Damian could react, Celeste Hartley, having used her family status to force her way past the perimeter guard, strode through the guest house door, her high heels striking the wooden floor like gunshots. "So this is where you've been hiding for 2 weeks." Her voice was ice cold, her blue eyes sweeping the room with undisguised contempt. "I had to hire a private investigator to find my fiancé. How very proud I should be." Damian set the pan down on the stove, his body automatically shifting to place himself between Celeste and the staircase leading up to the children's rooms. "You shouldn't be here, Celeste. Shouldn't be here." She laughed, sharp as broken glass. "We're 2 months from getting married, Damian. 2 months and you vanish without a word. You don't answer your phone. You don't—" Her voice died when her gaze caught on something behind Damian. He turned and his heart sank. Freya stood at the foot of the stairs, one hand holding Bella and Theo while Ollie clung to her leg. His small hands clamped tightly over his ears as he began to rock back and forth, distressed by the intruder's sharp voice. All 3 children were still in their pajamas, hair tousled, staring at the strange woman with curiosity mixed with worry. "What is this?" Celeste whispered, her face shifting from anger to shock to horror in seconds. "Damian, what the hell is this?" Bella, not understanding the tension, waved. "Hi, who are you? Do you want pancakes? Daddy makes really good pancakes." The word daddy left Bella's mouth like a bullet straight through Celeste. She stumbled back a step, eyes wide, staring at Damian as if she was seeing him for the first time. "Daddy, daddy, daddy!" Her voice went shrill. Ollie let out a low, pained whimper, burying his face deeper into Freya's jeans to escape the noise. "You have children? You have 3 children with—" She jabbed a finger toward Freya, unable to finish the sentence, as if even saying it would be an insult. "Celeste, calm down," Damian said, still controlled but with a razor edge underneath. "And don't point at people like that." "Calm down? You want me to calm down?" Celeste laughed like she'd gone mad, her face flushing with fury. "I'm your fiancé. Our families arranged this marriage 5 years ago, and you're living with another woman and her 3 bastard children as if we don't exist. Never." Damian stepped closer, and the change in him made Celeste retreat without meaning to. "Call my children bastards ever again." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. But the cold in it made the air in the room feel like it froze solid. This wasn't Damian, the polite fiancé Celeste thought she knew. This was Damian Cole, the Mafia boss New York feared. Celeste swallowed, fear flashing for a moment before pride took over. "Dominic will know about this. Your family will know." She steadied herself as she threatened him. "How do you think they'll react when they learn the only heir to the Cole empire is living with some nobody girl and 3 children of questionable origin? You'll lose everything, Damian. Everything you built. And for what? For her?" She looked at Freya with open contempt. Freya stood like a statue, shielding the children with her body. She didn't say a word, but Damian could see the way she trembled, the way fear was tightening around her throat. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, his world crashing in to shatter the fragile peace they'd just begun to build. Damian stepped right up in front of Celeste, close enough that she had to look up at him. "Listen carefully, Celeste, because I'll only say this once." His voice was gentle, almost a whisper, but something in it turned Celeste pale. "You can tell my grandfather. You can tell the whole world. I don't care. But if you dare to do anything at all, that harms Freya or those children, I will personally ensure the Hartley family name is erased before the alliance even has a chance to break. Understand that I have nothing left to lose except them." Celeste stood there white as paper, understanding that the threat wasn't empty. She looked at Damian, looked at Freya, looked at the 3 frightened children hiding behind their mother, then turned and walked out. The click of her heels faded away, the engine roared, and then it was gone. Damian stood still for a long moment, his back still to Freya. When he finally turned around, he saw her holding the children tight, her face drained to white. "The storm is coming," she whispered, and Damian knew she was right. The storm arrived faster than Damian expected. Only 2 days after the confrontation with Celeste, when everything seemed as if it had finally settled, Freya's phone vibrated early in the morning. She looked at the screen, and the blood in her veins seemed to turn to ice when she saw the name, Claudia Monroe. "Miss Bennett," the social worker's voice came through, more serious than Freya had ever heard it. "I need to meet with you and Mr. Cole immediately. There are new developments we need to discuss in person." Freya fought to keep her voice steady, even as her heart kicked wildly in her chest. "What is it, Miss Monroe? I thought the case had been resolved appropriately." The silence that stretched for several seconds on the other end nearly made Freya faint. "I've received new information, Miss Bennett. Serious information involving Mr. Cole. I'll be there within an hour, and I won't be coming alone." The call ended, and Freya stood frozen in the living room with the phone still pressed to her ear. Damian walked out from the kitchen and knew at once something was wrong when he saw how white she'd gone. "Freya, what is it?" "Claudia Monroe." Her voice shook. "She says she has new information about you. She'll be here in an hour and she won't be coming alone." She stared at him, green eyes full of horror. "Damian, what's happening?" He didn't need long to understand. Celeste, or worse, his family. They'd moved faster than he'd expected. Exactly 1 hour later, a Child Protective Services vehicle pulled up outside. But this time, Claudia Monroe didn't arrive with only a folder. A police officer came with her, and the severity on Claudia's face was so grave that Freya had to hold on to Damian's hand to keep from collapsing. They sat across from each other in the living room. Ryder had taken the children outside to play so they wouldn't hear what was coming. Claudia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "This morning, my office received an anonymous call," she began. Her voice professional but tightened with strain. The caller provided detailed information about Mr. Cole, his business activities and alleged ties to organized crime. She looked directly at Damian. "They claim you're a high-ranking member of a Mafia organization and that the children are living in a dangerous environment because of threats connected to your criminal activity." Freya felt as if someone had yanked the air out of her lungs. "That's a lie." Claudia lifted a hand to stop her. "I understand you want to protect Mr. Cole, but these allegations are serious. If they're true, I have a legal duty to ensure the children's safety." She paused, drew a slow breath. "I need Mr. Cole to confirm or deny this information." Damian sat in silence, his jaw clenched. He could lie. He could deny everything, but that would only delay the inevitable. His family had enough evidence to bury him if they chose to, and they had clearly decided they wanted to. "The allegations about my past," he said slowly, choosing every word with care, "aren't entirely without basis." Freya turned toward him as if he'd betrayed her. "Damian," but he continued, his voice steady, "I have never and will never put these children in danger. Whoever called you, Miss Monroe, I can guess who they are. And their motive isn't protecting the kids, it's punishing me for choices I've made recently." Claudia wrote notes, her face unreadable. "Whatever the reporter's motive, Mr. Cole, I still have to investigate. And until the investigation is complete, I need to ensure the children are safe." She looked at both of them. "I'm giving you 24 hours to provide evidence that the current living situation doesn't put them at risk. If you can't, I'll be forced to place Bella, Theo, and Ollie into temporary state custody." "No!" Freya sprang up, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. "You can't do that. They're my children. I raised them alone for 3 years. I've never hurt them. Never—" "Miss Bennett." Claudia stood, her voice softening a fraction but remaining firm. "I understand you're panicking, but my job is to protect children, and I can't ignore allegations this serious." She looked at Damian. 24 hours, Mr. Cole. I suggest you use that time wisely." When Claudia and the officer left, Freya collapsed onto the sofa, trembling in waves. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she didn't even wipe them away. "They're going to take my children," she whispered, her voice breaking into pieces. "Damian, they're going to take my children. I can't live without them. They're everything I have, everything I've ever had." Damian dropped to his knees in front of her and took her shaking hands in his. "Look at me, Freya. Look at me." He waited until those tear-soaked green eyes met his. "No one is taking our children. No one. Do you hear me?" "How can you promise that?" She sobbed. "Your family. They have power, money, everything. What do we have?" Damian looked at her, and in those cold gray eyes, Freya saw a determination she'd never seen before. "We have 24 hours, he said, his voice like steel, "and I know exactly what to do." That night, after the children were asleep, Damian led Freya out to the balcony, the place where they'd had their first real conversation since seeing each other again. But this time, there was no romantic moonlight, no gentle hush of waves. There was only heavy darkness. And 23 hours left before their world could collapse. "I'm going to tell you the plan," Damian began, his voice low and sure, "but you need to hear all of it before you react." Freya nodded. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but she was calmer than she'd been earlier. She'd lived through too much to believe panic could save anyone. "My family reported me because they want me back," Damian said, staring out at the Black Sea. "They think if they apply enough pressure, I'll abandon you and the children to protect my place as heir. They don't understand that position doesn't mean anything to me anymore." He turned to her. "The only way to end this permanently is to cut it off completely. Not temporarily, not halfway. Completely." Freya blinked. "What do you mean, Damian?" "I'm going to give up the inheritance," Damian said, each word clear, as if reading a sentence over his own life. "I'll sign official documents stating I'm no longer connected to the Cole family or any of their operations. I'll contact the FBI and provide information in exchange for immunity for myself." He paused. "And I'll move all of my legitimate assets into a trust for the children to make sure their future doesn't depend on anything connected to my family." Freya stood there, her mouth slightly open, unable to believe what she'd just heard. "Damian, you're talking about giving up everything. Your family, your money, your power, everything you've ever known. That's your whole life." "No." He shook his head. "My whole life is asleep upstairs. 3 children with my eyes and your smile, and the woman standing in front of me." He stepped closer, close enough that Freya could see the truth in his gray eyes. "4 years ago, you told me I was a coward because I couldn't choose you over my family. You were right. I chose the easy path and made you pay for my cowardice." His voice dropped. "This time I'm not making that mistake again." Freya was quiet for a long moment, her gaze searching his face for something. Hesitation, fear, regret. But she saw only iron resolve. "You sound good," she finally said, her voice no longer trembling, now hard. "But I've heard too many promises in my life, Damian. From foster families who promised they'd love me. From bosses who promised they'd pay on time. From you 4 years ago promising you'd be there." She stepped closer, facing him beneath the night sky. "Words are easy. Actions are what I need to see." "You want me to prove it?" Not a question. "I want you to prove it," Freya confirmed. "Not with money, not with luxury houses or expensive cars. I want to see you stand in front of your family and tell them you choose us, publicly, permanently, no way back." Damian looked at her and a small smile appeared. Not joyful, but the smile of a man who'd found a purpose. "Do you know what that means? My grandfather doesn't accept rejection easily. The moment I walk away, I become their enemy. No protection, no power, nothing except what I build with my own hands." "I know," Freya nodded. "And that's exactly what I need to see. I need to see you lose everything you once valued more than me and still stand here, still choose us." Her voice softened slightly. 4 years ago, you said you had to let me go to protect me. Maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't. But the result is, I lived through 4 years of hell alone." Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. "This time, I need to know you're willing to walk into hell with me." Damian took her hand and Freya didn't pull away. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice a vow, "my grandfather will come here. They can't tolerate me ignoring them for long, and when he comes, you'll see. You'll see who I choose." "And if you change your mind when you're facing him," Freya asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "if you look into his eyes and realize you can't give it all up." Damian stepped closer and cupped her cheek, his thumb wiping away the tear she hadn't realized had fallen. 4 years ago, when I said those cruel words to you, I looked into your eyes and watched your heart break." His voice tightened. "That night, after you left, I drank until I couldn't stand, and I swore to myself that was the hardest thing I'd ever do. I was wrong." He stared into her eyes. "The hardest thing was living 4 years without you. Facing my grandfather, giving up the inheritance compared to losing you again. Those things are nothing." Freya stood there in his arms, and for the first time since Claudia Monroe's call, she allowed herself to hope. Not blind hope like 4 years ago, but the hope of someone tempered by pain, Someone who knew promises could break and still chose to risk a second chance. 24 hours, she said at last. Show me, Damian. Show me that this time is different. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. I'll do more than that. I'll prove that this time nothing can pull us apart. The line of glossy black vehicles arrived the next afternoon exactly as Damian predicted. 3 luxury SUVs rolled up in formation outside the Hamptons estate, and from the middle one, Damian Cole stepped out with the bearing of a king come to reclaim lost territory. He was 75, but he stood straight as an oak, silver-white hair combed back perfectly, cold gray eyes like steel, the same eyes Damian and the children had inherited. 6 bodyguards in black suits formed a line behind him, like stone statues, silent and threatening. Damian was already waiting at the gate. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. No jacket, no tie, none of the Cole family symbols of power. Just a man standing at his own gate, ready to defend what belonged to him. From a second-floor window of the guest house, Freya watched with a heart pounding like a war drum. The children were in the playroom with Ryder, instructed not to come outside no matter what happened. Freya gripped the window frame so hard her knuckles turned white, watching the 2 men face each other in the afternoon light. You've gone too far, Damian. Damian Cole spoke first, his voice deep and commanding, a voice used to giving orders and being obeyed. I gave you space. I gave you time to reconsider, but you've abused my patience. You call reporting me to child services giving me space? Damian replied, calm but edged with a razor beneath. Or is that a new definition of family affection I never learned? Dominic narrowed his eyes. I did what was necessary to drag you back into reality. You are the only heir to this empire, Damian. You have a responsibility to the bloodline, to what your father and I built for 40 years, and you're throwing it all away for a woman and 3 children. Those 3 children are your grandchildren. Damian stepped forward 1 pace, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel small beneath his grandfather's presence. Your blood, the only real legacy I can leave the world, and you call them a threat that needs to be removed. They're the result of a mistake. Dominic flicked his hand as if swatting a fly. An unsuitable relationship you never should have had. I can resolve this quietly. Give that woman money. Make sure she and the children live comfortably somewhere far away, and you return to your life, to Celeste, to your family. Damian laughed, but it held no humor, only ice. You still don't understand, do you? I don't want to come back. I don't want Celeste. I don't want the empire, the power, or anything you're trying to shove into my hands. He met his grandfather's eyes, gray to gray, 2 generations in direct collision. For the first time in 36 years, I know what I want, and it's them. Freya and the children, my real family. Dominic's face hardened. You're saying things you'll regret. I've lived with regret for 4 years, Damian answered, his voice unwavering. Regret for listening to you and letting Freya go. Regret for not being brave enough to fight for the woman I loved. Regret for missing the first 4 years of my children's lives. He shook his head. I'm not adding to that list. Dominic stepped closer. And though he was old, there was something terrifying in the way he moved, in the absolute confidence of a man who had destroyed anyone who tried to block his path. If you cross this line, there's no coming back. You'll lose everything. Money, power, the family's protection. You'll have nothing but that girl and 3 children. Then I'll have nothing but them, Damian said. And in his voice, there was a piece Freya had never heard before. And that's all I need. You'll die to this family, Dominic snarled, his eyes like ice. From this moment on, you are no longer my grandson, no longer a Cole, no longer anything. Do you understand me? You will not exist to us. Damian looked at his grandfather, the man who had raised him after his parents died, the man who had taught him everything he knew about power and survival, and he realized, maybe for the first time in his life, that he wasn't afraid of him anymore. "I accept." His voice didn't shake, didn't hesitate. "I'll die to this family, but I'll live with my family." He pointed toward the guest house where Freya stood at the window with tears running down her cheeks. "They're my home now, and you can take everything, but you can't take them." Dominic stood there for a long moment, his face blank. Then he turned and walked toward his car without another word. Before he got in, he paused for a second, not turning his head. "You'll regret this decision." "Maybe," Damian said, "but it'll be my regret, not yours." The convoy drove away, leaving Damian standing alone on the empty road. He didn't turn back immediately. He stood there watching until the vehicles disappeared completely. When he finally turned around, Freya was standing at the guest house door, eyes red, but there was something on her mouth he'd been waiting for 2 weeks. A small smile, and in those green eyes, for the first time, there was trust. The very next morning, fulfilling the 24-hour deadline, Claudia Monroe returned to the Hamptons with an expression completely different from the last time. She sat in the living room, paging through the thick stack of documents Damian had prepared. And for the first time since she'd met them, she gave a real smile. "Mr. Cole, I have to admit, in 20 years of doing this work, I've never seen anyone do what you just did." She set the documents on the table. A notarized renunciation of inheritance, a non-prosecution agreement with the FBI, a trust fund for the 3 children with enough money to secure their future until adulthood, and most importantly, clear evidence that he had fully severed every tie to his family's organization. She looked at Damian with a reassessment that changed everything. "You gave up everything." "I chose what mattered more," Damian replied, his hand holding Freya's beside him. Claudia nodded and closed the folder. "Based on this evidence, I no longer have any reason to continue monitoring the case involving Miss Bennett's family. The file will be officially closed by the end of this week." She stood, looking at both of them with something close to respect. "Those children are lucky to have parents willing to sacrifice everything for them. I wish your family happiness." When Claudia left, Freya sat very still for a long moment, as if she needed time to believe the nightmare had truly ended. No one can take them now. No one can. No one can take them now. No one can threaten us anymore. The days that followed moved with a peace neither of them quite trusted as real. Damian finished every legal step, signed the final papers that formally declared he no longer had anything to do with the Cole family. His accounts were frozen, just as Dominic had promised, but he'd managed to transfer everything that was legally his into the children's trust and a separate account with enough for them to start over. One evening, after the children were asleep, Damian and Freya sat on their familiar balcony, looking out at the night sea glittering with starlight. "I've been thinking," Damian said quietly, "about what we do next. I'm not a Mafia boss anymore, and honestly, I don't know how to do anything else besides run things and threaten people." Freya laughed, the clearest sound he'd ever heard from her. "You also know how to make pancakes that are burned to a crisp." "They don't burn anymore," he protested. But the smile on his mouth betrayed how much he enjoyed it. Then he grew more serious. "I have an idea. You're a gifted chef. That's something I knew 4 years ago. Why don't we open a restaurant? Not a small food truck you have to fight through alone, but a real place where you can shine." Freya stared at him, surprised. "You want to open a restaurant?" "I want to build something with you," Damian said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Something that belongs to us, not my family or anyone else. You'll be the head chef. I'll handle the business side. We'll name it something that combines both our names so the kids know it's the legacy of both their mother and father." Freya was quiet for a long moment, gazing out at the sea as if weighing the idea. Then she turned back, and in those green eyes Damian saw what he'd been waiting 4 years to see. Hope, trust, and a love she was finally ready to admit. "Bennett and Cole," she said, testing the name on her lips. "It doesn't sound too bad." 3 months passed like a dream Freya didn't dare believe was real. The restaurant, Bennett and Cole, sat on a quiet corner in Brooklyn, not too far from where she used to park her old battered food truck. It was a deliberate choice, Damian said, to remind them where they'd started and how far they'd come. The place wasn't big, only about 40 seats, but every detail was carefully tended. Exposed brick walls gave it a rustic beauty. Warm pendant lights created an intimate atmosphere, and the kitchen was open so diners could watch Freya at work. That part was Damian's idea. He said he wanted the whole world to see her shine the way he'd seen it from the first moment he met her. Lunch was busy today, like it had been every day since they'd opened 2 months ago. Freya moved through the kitchen with the confidence and grace of someone who'd found her passion again, her hands finishing each plate with an artist's precision. From the kitchen doorway, she could see Damian at the host stand, talking with customers with a smile she'd never believed he was capable of only 3 months earlier. He'd changed so much. Or maybe he'd always been this man, simply buried beneath the cold armor the underworld had required him to wear. In the small office behind the restaurant, the 3 children were doing homework under the supervision of Lena, Freya's best friend, who had now become the restaurant's manager and an unofficial nanny. Bella still talked without stopping, and now she had an extra supply of Italian words she'd learned from Damian to show off to everyone. Theo had grown less guarded, the 3-year-old finally allowing himself to be a child instead of carrying an adult's burden, and Ollie, the boy who still needed strict routine and still didn't like being hugged, would sit close enough to Damian every night during story time that their shoulders touched. And that was how he said, "I love you," in his own language. When the restaurant quieted down in the late afternoon, Damian stepped into the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee, a habit they'd built over the months. He handed one to Freya, and she took it with a smile that now came naturally, no longer stiff or defensive the way it once had been. "Table 12 says your risotto is the best they've ever eaten in New York," Damian said, leaning against the counter, and Table 7 asked if they can book a birthday party here next month. Freya took a sip of coffee and let the familiar bitterness spread across her tongue. "You know, sometimes I still wake up and think all of this is just a dream. That I'll open my eyes and I'll still be in that miserable apartment, still fighting to pay rent." Damian set his coffee down and stepped closer. "This isn't a dream. This is the life we're building together." He lifted his hand and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "And I'll spend every day I have left making sure you never have to go back there again." Freya looked at him. The man who'd given up an empire just to stand here in a small restaurant kitchen, wearing a stained apron and smiling at customers as if he'd been born for it. She remembered the Damian from 4 years ago, cold and distant, always separated from the world by an invisible wall. That man and the man in front of her now felt like 2 completely different people. "I've been thinking a lot," she said softly, "about us, about what happened and what's happening now." She set her coffee down and turned fully toward him. 4 years ago, you broke my heart. I thought I'd never recover, never trust anyone again." She paused, but these last 3 months, watching you with the kids, watching you give up everything without regret, watching you learn to make pancakes and read stories and be patient with Ollie, even though he never says he loves you out loud, her voice caught. "I'm falling in love with you again, Damian, and this time I'm not afraid to admit it." Damian looked at her, and in his gray eyes Freya saw everything she needed: love, gratitude, and a promise that didn't need words. He bent and pressed his lips to her forehead, gentle and reverent, as if she was the most precious thing in the world. "I never stopped loving you," he whispered, "and I'll spend my whole life earning the love you're giving me." 1 month after Freya admitted her feelings, Damian began planning what he'd wanted to do for a long time. He told no one except Ryder and Lena, the only two people he trusted to keep a secret. Ryder helped him find the perfect ring. Not a massive diamond like the one he'd once bought for Celeste, but a small emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. Green, exactly like Freya's eyes. Lena made sure the children would be brought to the restaurant at the right time. Because Damian wanted this moment to include the whole family, he wanted their children to witness him officially asking for permission to become their mother's husband. That night, the restaurant closed earlier than usual under the excuse of equipment maintenance. Freya didn't suspect a thing. She was used to unexpected problems in a new restaurant. She stayed behind to clean the kitchen while Damian said he needed to check the books in the office. When she finished and stepped into the dining area, she stopped cold. The restaurant had been transformed. Hundreds of small candles sat on every table, on the windowsills, along the bar, casting a shimmering light like a small sky full of stars brought down to earth. White rose petals were scattered across the floor, leading to the center of the room where Damian stood in a black suit. Not the expensive kind he used to wear as a Mafia boss, but a simple suit he'd bought from an ordinary store. The suit of an ordinary man preparing to do the most important thing of his life. "Damian," Freya whispered, her green eyes wide, reflecting candlelight like two bright gems. "What is this?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he slowly dropped to one knee, and Freya lifted her hand to her mouth as she understood what was happening. Her heart hammered. Her legs felt like they might give out, but she forced herself to stand steady because she wanted to remember every second of this moment. "Freya Bennett," Damian began, his voice trembling slightly, something she'd never heard from him before. "4 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go. I said the cruelest things. I hurt you in ways that can't be forgiven, and I missed 4 precious years with you and our children." He paused and swallowed hard. "I can't change the past. I can't take back the nights you cried alone, the days you struggled to raise 3 children with no one beside you, the moments I should have been there but wasn't." Tears started sliding down Freya's cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She didn't want to miss a single word. "But I can promise you the future." Damian continued, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket and opening it. The emerald glittered beneath the candlelight, beautiful and modest, perfect in a way no diamond could ever be. "I am no longer the billionaire heir of the Cole Empire. I have walked away from the blood-stained power and the family fortune that once defined me. All I have now is the honest life we are building together. This restaurant and a heart that has belonged to you since the first moment we met." Freya laughed through her tears, remembering the first time they'd met, when she'd been an ordinary waitress and he'd been the mysterious customer with sad gray eyes. "Freya Bennett," Damian said, his voice steadier now, full of determination and love. "Will you marry me? Not because I can give you a luxurious life, but because I want to spend every day I have left loving you, making up for the years we lost, building a real family with you." Freya stood there, tears pouring, staring at the man kneeling in front of her. The man who'd given up an empire for her. The man who'd learned to make pancakes and read stories to his children. The man who'd stood before his grandfather and declared he was willing to lose everything just to be with her and their children. "You're so foolish," she said, her voice choked with happiness. "I've been in love with you again for a long time. I was just too afraid to admit it." "So that's a yes?" Damian asked, hope shining in his eyes. "That's a yes." Freya nodded, tears and smiles blending together. "A million times yes. A billion times yes. Every yes I can possibly say." Damian rose, his hands shaking as he slid the ring onto her ring finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made only for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her under the candlelight and white rose petals, kissing her as if 4 years of distance were melting away in their embrace. Right then the restaurant door opened, and the 3 children ran in with Bella at the front shouting, "Did Mommy say yes? Did Mommy say yes?" Freya laughed through her tears and knelt to gather her children into her arms. "Mommy said yes, sweetheart." "Yay!" Bella jumped with pure joy. "Now Daddy is real. Daddy will stay with us forever." Theo, the boy who always seemed older than his years, stepped forward and looked at Damian with serious gray eyes. "You promise you won't make Mommy cry sad anymore?" Damian knelt to his son's level and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I promise, Theo. I'll spend my whole life making your mom happy." Theo studied his face for a long moment, then nodded in acceptance. "Okay, you can marry Mommy." Everyone laughed, and Ollie, the quietest of them all, walked over and placed his small hand on Damian's hand. He didn't speak. He didn't look into anyone's eyes, but that was how he congratulated his father in his own language. Damian pulled his whole family into his arms, and in that moment, in a small restaurant glowing with candlelight and children's laughter, he knew he'd found what an entire life as a Mafia boss could never give him: true happiness. A year had passed since the night Damian knelt to propose to Freya in the shimmer of candlelight, and their life had changed in ways neither of them would have dared to dream. The restaurant Bennett and Cole was no longer just a small spot on a Brooklyn corner. It had become one of the city's most beloved dining destinations. Food magazines competed to feature the gifted head chef, whose dishes blended classic American comfort with elegant Italian influence. Customers had to reserve tables 2 weeks in advance, and every evening the dining room was full. But for Damian and Freya, their greatest success wasn't the articles or the revenue. It was the sound of 3 children laughing in the little office behind the restaurant every day. It was family dinners after the doors were locked for the night. It was the simple wedding band on Freya's finger, catching the light whenever she plated a dish. They'd married 6 months earlier in a small ceremony on the Hamptons beach, with only Ryder, Lena, and the 3 children as witnesses. Bella scattered petals with the seriousness of someone carrying out the most important mission of her life. Theo stood beside Damian as the youngest best man in history, and Ollie held the ring pillow with absolute concentration, making sure it never tilted more than 2 degrees. It was the most perfect day of Damian's life. The day he was finally allowed to call Freya his wife and the 3 children his kids, not only by blood but by law. One weekend afternoon, while the whole family was at the Hamptons house Damian had kept after cutting ties with the Cole family, an unexpected visitor arrived. Eleanor Cole, Damian's grandmother, a 72-year-old woman with silver hair and gray eyes identical to her grandson's, stood at the door with something Freya had never seen on any member of the Cole family: humility. "I know I have no right to come here," Eleanor said, her voice trembling, "but I'm old now. Dominic and I separated after what he did to you. I didn't agree with the way he treated you and your children." She looked at Damian, her eyes full of regret. "I stayed silent for too long, letting Dominic control everything because I thought it was how you kept a family together. But I was wrong, and I don't want to die without meeting my great-grandchildren, without apologizing for not protecting you when you needed it." Damian looked to Freya, and she understood the question in his eyes. She thought of 4 years alone, of the pain the Cole family had caused. But she also thought of the children, of their right to know where they came from, of the elderly woman standing there with trembling shoulders and eyes full of tears. Freya gave a small nod. "You may come in," Damian said, and for the first time in his life he saw his grandmother cry. That evening, after Eleanor left with a promise to return only if she was allowed, the family sat on the beach watching the sunset. The children were building sand castles, Bella directing her 2 brothers with the confidence of a queen. Freya leaned against Damian's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body and the soft rhythm of the waves like a soundtrack to the new life they'd made. "Daddy, Mommy." Bella ran over, her dress and hair covered in sand, but her smile bright as the sun. "Look at our castle. It's so big." Damian looked at the huge sand structure the 3 children had spent the whole afternoon building. then looked back at the house behind them, at the restaurant they owned in Brooklyn, and at the woman sitting beside him. "It's beautiful, Princess." Bella tilted her head, her gray eyes so much like her father's, shining with curiosity. "Daddy, are we royalty?" "Why do you think that?" Damian asked, pulling her into his lap. "Because we have a castle." Bella pointed at the pile of sand. "We have a king," she pointed at Damian. "We have a queen," she pointed at Freya. "And we have 3 super pretty princes and princesses." She pointed at herself and her 2 brothers running over. "And Great-Grandma said she's a noble lady." Freya laughed and pulled Theo and Ollie into her arms as the boys reached them. "You're right, Bella. We are royalty." "Royalty of what kingdom, Mommy?" Theo asked. He was 4 now, less solemn than before, but still endlessly curious. Damian looked at his family, his wife and 3 children, the people who'd saved him from the empty life he'd once believed was his fate. "The kingdom of love," he said, his voice warm, "where love matters more than power, where family isn't the people you share blood with, but the people you choose, where second chances exist for anyone brave enough to take them." Ollie didn't say anything, but the 4-year-old quietly scooted close enough that his shoulder touched his father's, and that was how he said, "I love you," in his own language. They sat there, 5 of them, watching the sun sink into the ocean as the sky shifted from orange to purple to deep blue. 4 years ago, Damian Cole had everything except love. Today he had only a small restaurant, 3 mischievous children, and the woman who taught him that sometimes losing everything is the only way to gain it all. And it was the only happy ending he'd ever wanted. Damian and Freya's story had come to a close, but the lessons from their journey would echo on. True love demands sacrifice and courage. A real family isn't built from money or power, but from presence, patience, and unconditional care. Everyone deserves a second chance if they truly change and prove it through actions, not only words. And most of all, no success means anything if you have no one to share it with. Dear friends, how did this story make you feel in real life? Do you believe in second chances for people who once hurt us? Have you ever had to choose between family and love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear what's in the deepest part of your heart. If this story touched you, please tap the like button and share this video with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss moving stories every day. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to keep bringing you quality content. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, peaceful days, and a home filled with love. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next video.